folks, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have Dan Shapir.
Hi from a very hot Tel Aviv.
We also have Steve Edwards.
Hello from a very hot Tel Aviv style Portland.
Right.
It's like really hot here. Yeah.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. Yeah, it's been getting warm here too. I think it's all over the place. Maybe out where our guest is too. We have a special guest this week. It's I'm not even sure how to say your name.
Vinicius. Yeah, that's
Vinicius
good.
Delacqua.
That's me. Yes.
We'll just call him Vinny for short.
Yeah, Vinny. I'm pretty used to being called Vinny, to be honest.
Big V.
Yeah.
My cousin Vinny.
Exactly. That's kind of how it started. Whenever I started speaking to American people. But yes, Vinicius here from Stockholm, Sweden, where I wish it was warmer. It's been a very rainy summer, especially rainy, and way worse than normal Swedish summers, even though Sweden is not necessarily known for the good weather.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm kind of wishing for that here, but I saw a headline a couple days ago in the newspaper that said that Utah is no longer in a drought, and in fact all of our reservoirs are over full. So
that's good.
Maybe we don't need the rain. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, we brought you on to talk about performance, and you shared an article with me before these guys got on. I know you've also been chatting with Dan. So I'm just going to let you guys take the lead as far as where we go, and then I'll chime in with my basic questions, since I am not a performance expert like you guys are.
Yeah, sounds good.
By you guys, you mean those two, because I'm not the performance expert either.
Yes. Well, performance is kind of important. I don't think everybody should or can be an expert, and I guess this is one of the things that we'll be talking about. It's not something that you can ignore either. Let's put it this way.
Right.
Yeah. It's one of those topics that it's like the more you know, the more you realize things go deeper, and you can get pretty deep.
You know what? Yeah, but one example I've heard frequently mentioned, and I've thought about it myself, is I'll look at Stack Overflow posts, and people will talk about, okay, what's the best way to loop through an array that's more performant, or what's the best way to handle large data sets in code, and so on and stuff like that. And people will obsess over these little things that will increase performance, and then they've got a 6 meg image file downloading on the same page that's going to block everything anyway.
Yes.
So I think it's safe to say that when you're talking performance, it's sort of got to be comprehensive and not just focused on code performance, I think, or bundling of code and that kind of stuff.
It also needs to serve a purpose at the end of the day, which again is something that I guess we will be talking about. But performance is not an ego trip. It's not about bragging rights. It's about serving your customers, your users. So anything that you do needs to be with that front and center. If it actually brings value to your users and your customers, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then it's kind of pointless.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole micro benchmarking thing was a very good example. Like it's very easy to look into things that sound very flamboyant, and you kind of miss the target where the actual hurt is, which is on the user's experience.
Also, in the context of JavaScript, it's lies, damn lies, and micro benchmarks.
Yes. That's a good one.
Yeah, because the way that the JavaScript engines work, the modern JavaScript engines and the optimizers they contain, I've read some quote unquote horror stories about people drawing conclusions from micro benchmarks that were effectively not just meaningless, but in fact wholly misleading. Let's put it this way. Like people wrote loops, but because it had no side effect, as it were, the optimizer kind of optimized the loop into nothing. And then what are you actually even measuring? So yeah, To put it bluntly, I wish my problems were how fast some loop in JavaScript works. Although occasionally it does actually happen, and I'll finish with that this part. I actually contributed back to the Prometheus client for Node. And I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a system or service for monitoring and alerting and stuff like that. Um, and the optimization was actually an optimization about how to loop and build the response string. Because in that particular case, via profiling, I proved that it actually did make a significant difference. So it can, but it usually doesn't. Anyway, enough
Yeah,
from my chitter chatter. Now over to you, Vinicius.
yeah. The I mean the benchmarks and has to serve a purpose, right? And if you just benchmark, like if you're micro focusing on things, they might not be painting a good picture for even what you're even trying to measure. This actually brings to a very interesting conversation that I've had a chance to have at JS Nation in Amsterdam
Hmm.
a couple of weeks back with Ryan from SolidJS and Attila. So we were talking about how can one build a well-structured benchmark to test different frameworks on some aspects, right? And we started talking about how it would be good to have something that can bring towards Web Vitals because it's something we already kind of have standardized, and that's how we can also measure actual impact and like break down different threshold, like different kind of common problems where you can try to build correlations and build a good delta between different frameworks. Like what kind of strategies pays off the most, right? Because Solid does it one way, React does it another. So you cannot necessarily measure them apples to apples in a way. So you need to try to establish like a good baseline of how can you benchmark those kind of things that are does in the end just deliver the kind of similar results, but they do it differently. So you're not really trying to benchmark in a way the framework itself, but different strategies that they use.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. First of all, it's worth mentioning that Ryan is kind of a regular guest here on the podcast. We've had him quite a number of times.
Hmm.
He's an incredible smart person. As like you said, he's the creator of Solid Start. He's also kind of the CEO of Signals.
Yeah, he is.
Really popularized that, and he's also one of the people most knowledgeable about frameworks in general. I mean, he one like his hobby is to get his hands on more or less every framework out there and then do all sorts of comparative testing and analysis and whatnot. So yes, if anybody is knowledgeable about how to best compare performance in other aspects of frameworks, it's probably Ryan. It's also worth mentioning a tool created by the Quick people called Mitosis, which you can actually use it to compile like sort of pseudocode, like React like pseudocode into various frameworks, and then you can kind of more easily build the same application using different frameworks and then be able to compare it. Because like you were saying, if we want to get away from micro benchmarks and we want to actually compare real applications built in various frameworks, we run right into the problem of the overhead of building and maintaining
Hmm.
sophisticated applications in a variety of frameworks. And who wants to do that? I just do want to mention that there's an alternative approach if you're interested in the performance of various frameworks, and I actually gave a talk about that at several conferences, including I think JS Nation a year before, which is to use rum data to compare the performance of frameworks. So you're not looking like at a specific application, you're looking across all websites built with a particular framework, and then you're not so much saying like how fast will my application be with this framework. You're more looking at how likely is it that I'll be able to build a fast website or web app using a particular framework. And you might say
Exactly.
this framework is more likely to produce faster websites or web apps, and this one is less likely. Not surprising, the one that is least likely is Angular, and the ones that are most likely are Quick, Solid, Svelte, these. Um, but you really need to be careful about mixing correlation and causation. Like, for example, people who use Quick are people who are more likely to be concerned about web performance. So are they producing faster websites because they're using Quick, or are they producing faster websites because there are people that care about web performance, and then so they know what to do, and they also happen to be using Quick for that reason. So you need to be kind of
Yeah.
careful with drawing these types of conclusions.
That's a very good point, actually, because it's one of the things that I like. You come to realize when you start collecting RAM data. So I helped
Okay,
establish
time out,
performance.
time out, time out. I know that we've defined this in other episodes, but rum data, what is it?
It's real user metrics.
Okay.
So you have two different sides of performance monitoring. So you have what is called the lab and what is called the RAM side. So the lab is just CI/CD, Lighthouse, and whatever you do to make sure that you don't perform regressions before changes actually go live to users. And on the realm side, you have different providers, and you can even use like GA, Google Analytics even have like collect automatically web vitals for
Yeah,
AWS.
it's basically the question of, are you testing your performance in a synthetic lab style setting, maybe even on your own computer while you're developing, and comparing that
Mhm.
way, or are you collecting performance data from the field, from actual real user sessions? So
Right.
obviously you can collect data for your own particular website, especially if you have enough traffic coming in. But the interesting thing, and we actually had Rick Viscomi from Google here to talk about it, um, Google actually collects data from all sessions on Chrome, and they put it into this database called Chrome User Experience Report, or CRUX for short. And Steve usually makes a joke about the crux of the matter or the crux of the issue or whatever. Yes, exactly. And the nice thing about what Google does is that they actually give everybody essentially access to this data. And also they attach all sorts of metadata to this data, like, which framework was used to build which website and whatnot. So you can do all sorts of slicing and dicing. So you can look at the performance of your own website or competing websites or e-commerce websites in
Mm.
general, in particular geos, on
Mhm.
particular types of devices, or created using particular frameworks, using particular libraries, etc. It's interesting data for those of us who like to geek out on performance.
Yeah, that's a really good point to start. So for building websites, like things can go wrong many different ways, even when people use the same framework. And to your point, exactly, Dan. Like some people when building, like because also like when you pick React, most people pick React is one of the most like it's probably nowadays the most used framework out there. Really, I don't keep up with the trends, but
Oh yeah,
it
for sure, for
yeah. So it's
sure.
it's it's just because of the sheer volume you have, right, of people writing. Like there will be all kinds of quality out there
It's
for
king
React
of the hill.
application.
It's case in point. Effectively, just to throw the numbers out, there are many websites and web apps being built in React as all the other frameworks put together.
Yeah, yeah. I would imagine so. And so in that mix, there would be a lot of so when you're trying to divide, like if you're building some sort of collection tool based on Crux and you're trying to divide percentiles for each framework, the React having so many more samples, right? It would kind of push the data towards the left, or rather towards the right side, where you're gonna have more worse metrics overall, just because of how many, just the sheer volume of it.
Yeah, that's one aspect. Another aspect is the fact that a lot of React websites, like there's a long tail of React websites. Websites either built like long ago or built with particular focus in mind. So, for example, if you're building a website in React and you're not using server-side rendering or static site generation, if you're only
Mhm.
using client-side rendering, which means that um, you're building the DOM representation of the website on the client side, then by definition, effectively, you're not going to have good core web vitals, which is the way that Google measures loading performance. Uh, you might have other aspects of performance that are good, like, I don't know, responsiveness or stuff like that.
Mhm.
But in terms of loading performance, if you're just using client side rendering or CSR, it's
Yeah.
not going to be good. And the reality is that a lot of React's websites use CSR. Some of them don't care. If they're not indexed, then maybe they don't care.
Mm.
But if you're looking at the metrics that Google is collecting, that's what you see.
Yeah, and it's interesting the whole pivoting that we are now having towards the server side as well. Because one of the things that like I've worked for Spotify and I worked for Klarna before Spotify, and in both places I've set up the like monitoring tools and start collecting RAM data and all this kind of stuff. And for CSR, one of the strategies that people have is normally like code splitting. Like that's pretty much your only or one of the few things you can do to try and improve that first paint and the LCP. And even that, like when I ran an experiment once trying to understand, especially for Klarna, when I was working at Klarna, I was trying to build benchmarks on how can we make sure that we have, as a third party, how can you make sure to affect the loading of the site you're integrated with the the least. How can you make sure that you're not the one who's causing the harm? And I ran an experiment on doing code splitting. And back then, mind you, it was like 2018, I think, or 2017. So it was I like did like a full code splitting, kind of like manual code splitting chunks everywhere, and like lazy loading some stuff. And back then it was kind of a revelation. Nowadays I think more people understand why, but like when you do that many chunks, things can get very congested when you're loading when you're loading websites. And doing a lot of JavaScript, small chunks at a time, you lose a lot in compression size as well, and you're also going to be hogging CPU time. And back then not even using HTTP2, if I remember correctly, we
Oh,
even though it was already available. So like the whole critical render path was absolutely destroyed, and congested. And I think back then we didn't even have the preload scanner to try to like hack into as like priority, and all this kind of stuff.
yeah.
So it was like back then was a revelation on, yeah, you can have too much of a good thing and then like start working with prioritization of chunks and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, we actually had Robin Marks recently to talk about this whole network thing and how it often behaves in a way that's not expected. And to bring it to a more general aspect and kind of related to the main topic that we've yet to focus on, I would say that one of my main things regarding performance that I always say is that you've got to measure.
Yes.
You've got to measure in order to decide what to focus on. And after you make a change, you got to measure to verify that the change you made actually improves things and doesn't even potentially degrade them. And I can give a case in point, like, if your CSS is small, a lot of times you will hear that you should inline that CSS into your HTML to avoid the extra round trip to bring the CSS, because CSS is render blocking. So you want to get it down as quickly as possible. And I've seen cases where inlining the CSS actually degraded performance. And without going into the details of why, the fact is that once you see that it's actually degraded, you roll it back,
Yes.
and because you know it is
Yes,
what
and
it is.
the whole measuring, it's like I always mention whenever you start working with performance, you always start from the data. You always start if you don't have a good collection story, if you don't have a good data story, you have to start collecting data from your users. That is right. So because lab data doesn't really tell you the whole story as you've been breaking down earlier. So you need to understand how's the actual user experience out there, and you need to understand even what kind of data do you want to collect, which kind of brings us into the topic we've been discussing as well on the article. And the whole thing of understanding your product and where you want to collect data and what data you're collecting, and building the the story around performance from that perspective first, instead of just trying to micro optimize first, is how you're going to make sure to deliver impactful results to your users.
So yeah, so I mean, I read part of the article, and yeah, and what I'm wondering, just jumping in, then you talked in your article about lab versus rum and things like that, and how to measure it. But I mean, if I'm really new to this, right? And Dan mentioned having measurements and knowing what your numbers are so that you can, verify that you had the effect that you wanted. Um, How do you start gathering that? I'm assuming that's kind of your first step, right? Is gathering that information, whether it's in a lab setting or rum setting.
Uh, yeah, I mean, very often if you're like engaged in a performance project or a related project, you'll be under kind of the gun to show results, and it's kind of tempting to start optimizing things. And whenever I was engaged in projects like that, I quickly pushed back and said, no, we got to get the data first. We got to have the graphs. We got to have the measurements, because otherwise you're just working blind. And if you want an extra incentive, when it comes to your time for your annual review or half annual review, and you want to like prove your worth to the company, having a graph that shows like this is what I did.
Mhm.
It's a line that goes up
Yes.
or
Hmm.
down depending on what you're actually graphing, is a great thing that you want to have when you're trying to get a raise or something like that. So
Yeah.
I literally in various occasions pushed back against management who were trying to get me to start optimizing before we actually had good measurements in place. And to your question, Chuck, we've had some guests on the show to talk about, these days there are really good ways that I have to mention to get good metrics. One is if you is basically just use the Google Search Console. In
Hmm.
the Google Search Console, they have a Core Web Vitals panel, and you can get information about pages that have performance issues. Um, it's not an ideal and optimal RUM solution. For example, they average the results over 28 over a period of a month effectively. So improvements you will make will take time to show, and likewise degradations will take time until they actually manifest themselves. But it's a good starting point.
Right.
Another good starting point is that there, like Vinicius mentioned before, there are a lot of third-party tools and services out there that are fairly straightforward to integrate into your website. Like some of them are even like partially free.
Mhm.
And but we've had people from Sentry. They have a RUM solution. We
Hmm.
had people from
Ray gun.
Raygun, Akamai. We've had people from Akamai. They
Hmm.
have the Impulse. There are a lot of great tools out there that are fairly straightforward to integrate and that you can start getting data from. You know, Pick your
Yeah,
poison.
yeah. You do have a lot of
Yeah.
options like the Bugbear and Rum Vision. You
Yeah.
also have a speed curve, but there is there.
Ask a
So
question real quick. We're talking
yeah,
about tools. How often do you see because a lot of these tools are basically jumping JavaScript into your page, right? So I know
yes.
Google Analytics is a classic. So how many times do you see the tool that you're putting in to measure performance hurting your performance because of everything it's putting in your site to measure performance?
Funny you ask. I have heard horror stories with OTL and
Maybe we
integrations
should
where
name names.
I'm not gonna name any names, but I have heard interesting stories when trying to implement open telemetry, and
Mhm.
that's one of the examples where it can go pretty bad in one way when you're
And
trying to measure.
yeah, I know. I
Yeah,
remember Netlify had a service that you could pay for. I haven't seen it in a while. Where they would run stuff like that on the server, so you're not dumping JavaScript into your page. I never used it. I
Yeah,
just remember reading about it, seeing it as an alternative.
Most of the backends have services like that too, and sure, they don't give you, like, the core web vitals, right? Because they're not
yeah, they're front end things, not back
because
end
Right.
things.
the
yeah.
yeah,
But
because they're front end measurements, not back end measurements, but,
this is one of the
they
things.
give you
Sorry.
some information about how long it takes to get the
Yeah,
data out
but
there.
I will say this, like Vinicius mentioned, you kind of need to be careful. But most of the RUM providers that actually measure core web vitals, they know about core web vitals. They've done work to ensure that whatever they're providing has little or no impact on your score. If
Exactly, yeah.
one of them does, it will pretty quickly come out. But just Google is your friend. Search what people say about it, and try it out yourself and see what happens.
Exactly. Yeah, and on the whole topic of backend, I wrote an article last year for Perf Calendar about server timings, and I think there's a good amount of things you can do to help understand and like end to end sort of tracing when it comes to even to backend stuff. I mean, we don't have it as well standardized as Web Vitals, but understanding because one of the things that a performance specialist becomes is like it comes in three parts, right? Like is a salesman, is a data analytics person that has to understand what kind of data you're trying to collect and understand the data you collected in order to visualize it well, and a good an engineer side as well. So the back end part, there is a whole lot of attributions that you can build within the backend side. Unfortunately, not as well standardized as Web Vitals, but that's actually a good opportunity, right? Where one can try to define good metrics within backend.
Mhm.
But like when you're trying to understand, especially for instance, when you're now starting to have more React being run on the server, right? With Next, the newest versions of Next, the newest version of React, and things are kind of be moved a bit more to the back end, and processing part time is going to be spent more that TTFB window, and it does have a great amount of benefits that you can get out of it, but some things can be a bit unexpected, like so you can have some performance degradation as well on some types of websites out there, because not all websites have trying to deliver the same kind of experience. Does not all parts of web vitals matter equally to all of websites? And so if you are working on something that is very sensitive to that TTFB window, you really want to make sure to understand from the server timings, then from behind the curtain, network curtain, what's going on, and you can collect that data as well. Um,
Yeah, and by the way, like I said, we had Robin Marks on the show, and one of the things that came up is basically that if you really care about TTFB, and especially if you've got a global audience, then you probably want to be using a CDN. Um, and then the TTFB of your own server is not irrelevant, but is less impactful. Let's put it this way. But I would actually like to pull us back a little bit, and looking at your article, which I have read. One of the things that you wrote about that really resonated with me because it really matches my own experience is about getting buy-in from management. Can you talk about that a little bit?
yeah, absolutely. Is the salesman part of the triad? So is like in a way you really have to understand the product you're working with. So if you're working in a product team, one of the things that you constantly hear, and I've certainly faced it myself as well when I was working on product teams, is you have a certain pressure to ship features constantly. So sometimes, well, sometimes and sometimes more than others, you will have a pressure looming and trying to solve backlog stuff, which some for most cases performance kind of falls under. You it's hard to get the buy-in coming from management. So one way you can start doing it is, of course, as we mentioned, collect data, and with that data you collect, you want to try to understand correlations between pain points of your users and how your product is performing. Because when you're trying to build work within performance, you really want to understand on if you work on a certain part of application, you will deliver the most optimal results for for the product to perform. So you're not only trying to cover the engineering side, but you want, like when getting buy-in, you want to make sure to cover the product side. Like the shipping good metrics not only for APMs and for your performance metrics, but also understand how those will affect your product metrics. So the business side also matters. So you have to wear kind of like both hats and build that bridge between engineering and product. That's how you can strengthen the buy-in you get from management.
I totally agree with that, and it kind of reminds me of an interesting experience that I've had quite a number of years ago, and I won't be naming names. Um, but I remember talking with this person. I was working at a certain company, and I was speaking with one of the people in product, and I asked that person why their product specifications never include any performance requirements. And they answered first, he said, I don't know how to specify performance requirements. And I get that. And it's become easier these days, again, thanks to Google with Core Web Vitals. They've made the industry aware of a relatively small set of well-defined metrics that you can tell that person from product, hey, read this article. I actually even gave a talk about it at a previous employer to product people to kind of teach them about how performance is measured and the impact of performance and whatnot. So that was his first point. And the second point, which really made me laugh, was he said, but I expect our developers to write the code in the most performant way possible because that's what developers do. And I really started laughing because we work like you said, we're always in a rush to deliver features, we're always under the gun, we're always facing short time frames and not enough resources, and certain aspects like performance can go out the window in these types of scenarios. If you're pressured to deliver a feature, and you won't be really worrying about the performance impact if you hardly have time to finish the requirements that are actually in the spec. um, and yeah, so if and that's from my perspective why management buy-in is so important, because very often we hear about people saying, hey, can't we do stuff like that grassroots, can't we introduce quality like from the bottom up and stuff like that? And the answer is no, because if you're going to be engaged in a large scale ongoing project that's going to require a lot of resources, time and effort, maybe even money if you're, let's say, buying rum tools and other things, then management needs to be aligned with that. Uh, Otherwise, it just can't happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And then becomes a fight, right? Over what your engineering team interests are and where your product team trying to ship and all the things that product teams have agreed on for quarters. So it does become like you need to get a lot more involved with the product side and understand what kind of values matter the most for the product side. And that's why it becomes a salesman pitch, because it's not just blindly trying to web vitals have done wonders for that conversation starter. Like I think most people nowadays understand some aspects of web vitals, or at the very least, when you mention it, that it matters for SEO, it matters
Mhm.
for the product. So that's great. That's really like, because I still remember from my the days at Klarna, we're having to build, like what metrics matter the most for a product was an actual task. You had to so many metrics available to you, and so little knowledge around how they affect different parts of the product. But when it comes to building those kind of values and translating them to product, it becomes onto where it's very important to understand the product that you're working on, because like not all products will have, like as I mentioned a bit earlier, like not all products will have the same kind of values, or you can't apply all metrics blindly to all products, because some metrics just don't matter as much to certain type of products. For instance, me working at now at Volvo Cars, one of the products that I'm currently working very closely with is the configurator that they have. And the configurator as a product is just an actual product team that cares for it. And it does have very, very different business metrics, product metrics than one would think about when you think about conversion and all this kind of stuff. So how the product behaves in real time is a lot more important than how it loads, because you can do a lot of stuff to try to trick it loading, but once it is loaded, that's the thing. Like the INP metric for that product is like king. That's the most important part. INP and CLS. So you need to understand which metrics is going to be deliver the most impact for the types of products you're trying to ship, so you can build KPIs and SLAs with downstream teams and try to have this kind of consolidated governance model, or at the very least just understand how things impact your application differently. And from that part within the engineering, you can understand also how to tie up those engineering metrics with what kind of product metrics matter the most, and you can try to build correlations from that.
I totally agree with what you just said. An interesting case that I had experience with was when I was working at Wix. There was the Wix editor that you would use to build websites using WYSIWYG, dragging and dropping things around. And you had the actual websites that you built with the Wix editor. So for the websites, the most important aspect was the loading performance, like as measured by, let's say, LCP, largest contentful paint. But for the editor itself, I mean, obviously you don't want it to take half an hour to load, but most customers didn't care so much about how long it took the editor to load. What was more important for them was that once the editor was loaded, it was really responsive and snappy.
Mhm.
That when you drag things around, they would drag smoothly and not like, with this jitter or trailing after the cursor or stuff like that. So you really need to be cognizant about what it is that is important to your users in the context of performance and what it is that you want to optimize. And again, going back to that aspect of getting buy in from management, that it's actually worthwhile to invest the effort. Because one of the things that I like to say is that performance is a journey, not a destination. It's not like I'm going to invest a little bit of time and effort, get our performance house in order, and then we can forget about it forever because it's done. That's not how it works. You need to put systems in place to identify regressions, because regressions will happen. And then when you detect a regression, you're going to have to invest effort in fixing that
Yeah,
regression.
exactly.
So it's ongoing effort. And by the way, in this context, I'm going to post a good link. So again, thank you to the people at Google. Their web.dev website has a section called case studies, where they post a lot of case studies about how improving performance has impact variety of businesses and products. So you can actually go in there, find services that are similar to what you're building, and then be able to bring that to management and say, here, you know, this company X does something that's similar to what we're doing. This is how improving performance has impacted their business, their bottom line, and this is why it's worthwhile for us to invest this effort as well. Um, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that back in the days where I actually have an article from that time I'm posting here on the chat, and the building a and then performance monitoring that was for lab, that article that I pasted there. So it's like before the time when we had CI/CD with Lighthouse. So I was trying to integrate Lighthouse into CI/CD manually and build my own CI/CD server with Lighthouse. One of the things that Lighthouse allowed, I think it still allows us to do, I haven't dug into the Lighthouse source code for quite some time. It was to define different weights for different metrics. So
Hmm.
when you get a lighthouse score from within your CI/CD, you can define, for instance, if your application matters more, INP matters more for application. Um, you can customize the weights of the score you get from Lighthouse based on that. At least you could back then. I'm not entirely sure if you still can because I haven't dug into the source code for some time. But it's one of the things that back
Well,
then I
it's open
did.
source, so you can probably do whatever you want if you're
Yeah.
willing
True. Yeah,
to
true.
put in the
Exactly.
effort.
Yeah, but like back then when I was doing that kind of integration, is that defining for instance back then, gosh, like one of the metrics that we used to have. I mean, LCP, FCP still were around. So like those as a third party at Kalana was the ones that mattered the most. So I like you can fine tune the scores based on the weights that you want, matter the most for you.
So we kind of talked about it already, but still, one of the sections in your article is about metrics and KPIs and SLAs. Can you elaborate about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're trying to establish governance, if you try governance, and or if you're trying to get better understanding even from what you're trying to ship, and normally we don't work in isolation. And as you're working for a very very small company, normally you have teams either above you or below you. So you are the downstream, or you are working with teams downstream. So a graph service or an API or a backend. So you you after you understood which kind of metrics matter the most for you and for your product, and you're starting to build correlations, one of the natural next steps is to build KPIs, so key performance indicators for your application with a lens of performance, of course, and building also service level agreements, SLAs, against teams that might affect your performance. So this comes in, the any KRAE person would know those by heart, but it's one of the things that really helps you strengthen your because it's pretty much it's what you said. It's not a race; it's a continuous thing, and you will have regressions. And whenever you have regressions, you first of all want to document those, and you always want to document both regressions and any performance improvements that you ship because you want to understand how things worked over time or not. And having those SLAs is a good way to communicate downstream and ensure to have more resilience on things that you're trying to ship. And because some parts of the performance, when you work in a big product, some parts of the performance spectrum is not directly coming from you. One of the things, for instance, that we have, and I think most people out there will know this, is GTM. And GTM can really, if you have a marketing team that's pushing a lot of tags on GTM, that can really mess you up on performance, and it's not even coming from your code base necessarily. And that's
GTM
one
is
for
Google Tag Manager, right?
Google Tag Manager. Yeah, so Google Tag Manager is a brilliant thing. It's a really really interesting product, but anything can be misused, and such is the the nature with GTM in some teams. And
Yeah. It's
one
the
of the things
marketer's
that
junk drawer. It really is. But
it's
Yeah,
yeah, and one of the things that I'm currently investing a lot of time uh, in the governance model that I'm trying to build is around GTM as well. But then how can you even? It's like those the other side with the GTM side is a completely different set of skills. So how can you make sure that you build a connection on things that both of you can align on and understand? So that's where the KPIs and SLAs come in, and you can really make sure that you can have a proper well structured process around it.
mhm.
by the way, we did have, I think, Adam Bradley from Builder.io who spoke about the tool that they built called Party Town,
Fantastic.
which can reduce the impact of third-party scripts and pixels and whatnot by moving them off of the main thread onto a web worker. The big challenge is that it's a pretty manual effort. We spoke about needing management buy-in in order to approve effort. That's one of those things. It's not a drop-in solution that you can just put in your product and watch the improvement. You probably need to do some manual integration work and in order to get the real benefits. But when you do, the benefits can be substantial. In the case of Next Insurance, where I previously worked. Uh, by putting in Party Town, we were able to dramatically improve our INP. The number of pages that have good INP scores went from about something like less than half our pages to effectively all our pages,
Oh wow.
thanks to using Party Town. Um, yeah, because yeah, unfortunately, a lot of these third-party scripts can have significant impact on the responsiveness of the website. They run a lot of JavaScript on the main thread unless you configure it otherwise, and that impacts how responsive the page is to user interactions.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's why building a good attribution model is like absolutely fundamental. It's one of the things that I'm obsessing over as of late, because once you have the metrics up on a monitoring tool, that's a great start. You're off to a great start. You're starting to understand, the nature of a product, and you're starting to understand how the things you do impact it. But then again, as previously mentioned, like performance degradation can come from different parts of the web. You have the Bugbear actually released a great article just a few weeks ago about the impact of Chrome plugins. So if you have like different
Oh
different
right.
plugins within Google Chrome, they can also affect your performance, and some more than others. And there's a brilliant article there. I'll see if I can find before the this recording ends. But it's a really good example on how performance sometimes you can have some degradations coming, on your real user metrics, all nonetheless, and coming from different kind of things, even out of your control. So building good attributions means not only having the metrics, but Web Vitals have an actual attribution build that you can use, where you can send more information about each one of the metrics you're collecting. So if you have INP, you will show you, if you want, like details about the loaf data, the long animation frame, and you can have a better intelligence on where is it coming from. Is it coming from a third party? Is it coming from even a COM extension? Is it coming from Google Tag Manager or something like that? And that can give you even more power when we're talking about RAM.
Yeah, a
If
lot of the tools provided by RUM providers have kind of attribution capabilities built in. So, you know, you you don't necessarily need to be an expert, but that's actually another point that I want to mention is that it does require some expertise. Like, don't expect that, if you want to do some performance improvements on your website, it does require some know-how. So either you find it really interesting and you invest the time and effort and learn it, or alternatively you can bring in an expert, maybe hire an expert if you're large enough. If you're not, you can bring in a consultant, somebody like Harry Roberts, which we mentioned before we started recording. We actually had him as a guest on the show. Can bring on somebody like that to do an audit for you and kind of point you at the right directions.
Yeah, I'm curious with you mentioned Chrome extensions as an example, and you have attribution that tells you when you gather the information. Hey, look, people who have this extension are having this impact, right? One way or the other. Um, what do you do about it? I mean, can you just add it to your CI for some of your tests to check for the performance to get once you've set those performance standards, do you put a banner up that detects, hey, you're running this Chrome extension and it impacts, it may slow
Probably,
down your thing. I mean, yeah. Once you have
probably,
it, what do you do with it?
yeah, no. So first of all, yes, you can put it as part of your testing environment for sure. The question is the slowdown happening because just the fact that the extension is there? Like, is this
Right.
extension just doing generally a bad thing? Or is it something that's kind of a bad react, some sort of reaction, or like, your page specifically doesn't work well with this extension for some
Right.
reason. Now, if it's the latter, then obviously, if it's a popular extension, then you may want to invest effort in trying to fix it. Like
Hmm.
obviously you can't fix the extension, but you can try to fix your stuff. If it's the former, if it's just a problem with the extension, huh, basically it is what it is. You
Mhm.
may want to put some notice on your website. I wouldn't pop up an alert. That seems overly intrusive.
Yep.
Uh, but like, having something in your knowledge base, so at least your support
Okay.
people would be cognizant of the problem, and if a customer complains, then they can ask them, are you using this extension, and if so, please don't.
Mhm.
But it's like a fact of life.
Right.
Yeah.
uh
So on that, we have a great talk from last year's Perf Now by Team Verity. The name of the talk is noise canceling ROM or something like that. I posted a link here on the chat, and that talks about what can you do to eliminate noise out of your metrics. And that's why like having this kind of attribution and understanding your attribution. And you're very right, like this kind of, and this is one of the problems when it comes to performance as a subject, is because it is somewhat of a very steep vertical for people to get into. And but one of the things you can do is, once you to start understanding these kind of things, is to understand also how to remove noise from your metrics and understand better how your actual percentiles are split up onto, and understanding the distributions. Because also like building better attributions for a product comes from bringing back to the whole, like tying up with your product values, right? Being It comes to understanding what kind of markets means matters the most for your product, right? So you don't want to really
Hmm.
measure globally, because the bigger the metric scope you're trying to have, the harder it is for you to find attributions, or the harder it is for you to understand them, because you're trying to deal with something that is too large of a context. And it's a lot easier when you're trying to slice that data up. And like, let's say for a certain product, certain markets are a lot more important, and for that
Hmm.
product, certain pages or functionalities are a lot more important. So you definitely want to slice your analytics and your data and your run metrics in such a way where you can cut through the noise that you gather globally into something that builds better attribution models and builds better correlations out of it. So that, like,
Right.
removing this kind of noise from your metrics is also really, really good way to avoid this kind of problem.
I'll give a different example for it might be that certain geos have performance issues. So for example, at again talking about Wix, global company, we saw very different performance profiles. For example, for North America and for South America. Um, on the other hand, you need to be careful with these sorts of things because, for example, you might say, "Hey, something really bad happened in Colombia. For some reason, I'm seeing a significant degradation." And then you realize, "Hey, I only have like 8 sessions a day, so if just one bad session can skew my data for that geo." So you kind of need to be careful. And again, this is something that you also talked about in the article about how you need to be careful with blind spots, like how some data can hide or obscure some other data and cause you to miss important aspects.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I bring within the arc, I bring to the same talk by Tim, and it is like, it is one of the things that it comes again from the triad, right? Where that's from the data analytical part, where you need to understand the how to analyze the data you have, because otherwise you might be looking to too much noise, and then it's harder to work with that data, right? Like then your performance work that you're trying to carve out of the data might even be misaligned. So when you're
Hmm.
trying to ship performance, you might not even see the needle moving properly because you're just being affected by noisy data run data.
I will say one thing, and I think we can summarize that this particular aspect with it is that I'm also a member of the W3C Web Performance Working Group, and there's always tension there with regard to attribution because you've got the run providers who are pushing to get ever more accurate and detailed attribution data that they can externalize and expose to their customers. And on the other hand, you've got the browser manufacturers who are concerned about privacy issues. So, with too much attribution, that opens the door to all sorts of fingerprinting techniques and stuff like that. So you kind of need to strike a good balance there, or put another way, yet another reason why we can't have good things.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, they're
That's
both
a very
valid
good point.
concerns, so
Yeah, it is a valid concern.
It is a
They-
very good point. Yeah.
they're both valid concerns. I really want to know what's causing my headaches, but yeah, I also want to protect my users.
Yeah, there are good ways to anonymize that data, and most
Yeah.
collection tools will make sure to do so. But that is if you're building your own collection tool, that's a very valid concern to have.
Yeah, and again, it's also a question for the browser manufacturers whether or not to provide certain APIs or not, because obviously, if you could ensure that only good actors actually use those APIs, that would be wonderful. But unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we're nearing the end of our show. Is there anything
Yeah.
in particular that you wanted to mention that we haven't mentioned so far?
I mean, I can basically summarize that working with performance in a company, large or small, it starts with data, and understanding that data is naturally the second step. Because a lot of times you're very eager to get down with actual code and try and move that needle, but sometimes it can be a bit too early, and if you try to work on something that is not going to be shifting not only the actual application performance towards the right way, but not affecting the right product metrics, it's very hard to get the buy-in again, and it just gets harder to get a performance work off the ground. Of course, if you're working with a mature engineering organization, that can be a different story, but most people are not in that kind of stage, right? So working with attributions first and data and analyzing it might seem the most boring part, but it's the most important one as well. So make sure to understand your data before trying to work on performance.
Good deal. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do our picks. Before we do that, though, where do people find you on the internet if they're thinking, "Oh, I want to know more"?
Absolutely. I am mostly nowadays on Twitter.
X, it's X.
Everybody knows what you mean when you say Twitter.
I'm joking.
Yeah, it's just I am not yet. Most of the times I forgot it. It's been renamed, to be honest with you. But
I think
yes.
everybody would prefer to forget.
There I am, web Twitter. And I mean, I have a pretty easy name to look on LinkedIn, but that I spend most of my time talking about performance on Twitter. That's where most people can find me. Web Twitter with it's TWITR. It's a bit shortened.
Cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do our picks. Steve, you want to start us off?
Going for the high points first. Okay.
That's right.
Before I get to the dad jokes of the week, I do have one pick, and this has been around for a while, and I've heard other people talk about it extensively, but it's something I finally started digging into, and that's the Warp Terminal. For years, I've always just used the built-in terminal app that comes on Mac, and I've gotten fairly good at switching tabs, and I've got tab group set up and all that. But I'd heard a lot about it, so I started playing around with the Warp Terminal, and it's really, really slick. Makes it very easy to find things. There's all kinds of enhancements. You can create custom workflows, which are sort of like custom commands where you pass in parameters, and you can. It's pretty easy to customize your prompt to show like what Git branch you're on and what the difference is between you and your remote in terms of number of commits. Colors. There's all kinds of customizations you can do. I know a lot of people use iTerm too, and I've used that in the past, but I really like the Warp Terminal just in what I've played around with it. You can find it at warp.dev on the internet.
I'm going to jump in here because Warp is a recent thing that I've picked up as well. And yeah, all the things that Steve said. It also has some AI, so you can basically tell it what you want it to do, and kind of like an AI prompt. And it sometimes works, and sometimes it doesn't work quite how you want. Sometimes it also interprets my Git commands as, or my commands within, like, using the Rails CLI, and it'll say, "Oh, what you're saying is you want to do this," and I'm like, "Yes," because that is literally the command to do that. So it's not perfect, but sometimes it's handy when you're trying to remember the exact combination of sed, awk, and grep that you want in order to get the thing. So anyway,
Yeah, it also has some team stuff where you can use it with teams and share workflows and share output, and share
yeah, I
commands
haven't
and that
used
kind of
any of
stuff.
that.
I haven't had a chance to play any either, but the downside of it that some people don't like is that you have to create an account, and they say
Yes.
why you need to do that, and so some people don't like that. But anyway, it's really pretty cool. I really liked it.
Yep.
All right, dad jokes of the week. So I've never understood why people wear black when they want to be sneaky. They should just wear leather armor because it's made of hide.
Oh my God.
Didn't even get a smile
Good
out of
one.
Dan. All right, I got to keep working here.
I was going to
So,
say, somebody laughed. Don't laugh. It only encourages him.
um, so I took my kids to see Disney on Ice, and it really sucked. It was just some old dead guy in a box. Walt Disney on
I
Ice.
actually responded to that
Yes, I
when you
loved it.
posted it. I said that I actually expected a dead mouse rather than a dead
Oh,
guy.
true.
But
Well, if you notice on Twitter, somebody responded with an actual cartoon of that same joke, and it shows these people looking. Here's Walt Disney in a clear coffin on ice. It's really pretty morbid, but it's very funny too. And then finally, what famous military general was killed by a cannon? Right. Napoleon Bonaparte. Those are my jokes of the week.
All right. Well, thank you for elevating my week. Dan, what are your picks?
first would like to unmute. I would like to remind us all that Napoleon actually started as a gunnery officer, and got one of his big promotions because there was this demonstration and they were trying to mob the parliament, and he basically dispersed the crowd by firing the cannons point blank
Oh,
into the
gosh.
crowd. Yeah,
Mhm.
that got him to become a general. So yeah. Um, anyway, so about being blown apart by Bonaparte. Uh, yeah. Anyway, so I don't have that much in the way of picks this week. So one thing that I have is that Matt Pocock, who we've had as a guest on our show to talk about TypeScript, has written a book about, well, surprise, surprise, TypeScript. And since I consider Matt to be one of the foremost experts on this topic, this is a really good thing, especially given that the online version is available for free. So I'm actually going to share the link here right now, and we'll also obviously put it in the show notes. And the dog is barking, so hopefully you can hear what I'm actually saying. But here's that link to that book online. Highly recommended. Making effective use of TypeScript is incredibly useful and incredibly powerful, and it's something that's kind of expected from web developers these days. I think it can be, it's a fair statement to say that almost all of us have moved off of you know untyped JavaScript and into TypeScript. So that would be my first pick. My second pick is the fact that Google has kind of integrated AI into the browser, sort of. So they're actually experimenting with window.ai. It's currently I think it last time I checked, it was only in the beta version of Chrome and not in the release version, and you needed to enable a flag to get it to work. But it's basically what they've done is that they've baked Gemini Micro, whatever they call it, into
Mhm.
the browser itself, so that you've got a large language model that's a small large language model that's effectively baked into the browser itself and runs locally, so that you don't need to be concerned with paying the bills for running it in the cloud, which turns out is how Nvidia is making a ton of money, and all the AI startups are burning through cash by paying all their money to Nvidia. Being able to run models locally is a very interesting technological development, and it will be interesting to see what happens with that and how various websites are able to leverage this technology once it becomes mainstream and open to all.
Yeah, I mean,
And those,
considering how well the original Gemini rollout went, I think this should go very smoothly without any hitches. No bias
yeah,
or anything.
exactly. And also, there's the fact that it's a model that's not optimized for any particular use case. It's kind of a general model. So there's also that aspect to factor in. I don't know what you want to do with AI, but it does open up some interesting opportunities for user interactions. Let's put it
Mhm.
this way in websites.
Yeah, because it has because it's a Gemini micro or whatever. It has a much smaller context than what it was trained on, but it's still very good to as a transformer, as a LLM. So if you are curious about that stuff, I definitely suggest following Jason Mays, the web AI lead from Google. He has a lot of great demos on what you can do with that stuff, because it's not only the web AI APIs, the upcoming, but you can also load models with WebAssembly and Web GPU that you can use your own models kind of locally. So there's a lot of good stuff that you can do.
Yeah, the only downside there is that running the model locally, like I said, solves a lot of the cost issues, but it's also these models can be even the smaller models can be fairly large.
It can be very large. Yeah.
Mhm.
Downloading them locally, that can we were talking about performance. That could be a performance issue.
I was gonna say
Yeah.
that could hurt your
That
performance
can
having
hurt
to
your performance.
download all
But
that.
then again, it depends on the nature of your product, right? Because if you're, for
Yeah.
instance, working with something like Photoshop on the web, they kind of do that. And it's not about the loading times, but execution times in that case.
Yep.
Which then you actually gain a significant boost, right? Because it's local. So the latency is non-existent. Well, and then I
So
guess it's my picks.
yeah, you can go, and then I'll go.
Yes,
So go ahead.
I have. Okay. So for my picks, I have two things. Since we're on the topic of AI and ML, I've been started to dive into ML training and machine learning, building models, and this kind of stuff. And I actually chose to do it with Elixir as a language. It's a brilliant
Mm.
language. José is fellow Brazilian. I'm also from Brazil, and it's a really nice functional language to get started with. And one of the things is that, especially come from JavaScript, there's not as much tooling fatigue, because when you within Elixir, things are kind of like very coherent, and there are all of the options are kind of built by the same people, so everything kind of speaks, not, and no pun intended, the same language, so things kind of flow very easily. So it's not like, for instance, if you're trying to learn Python and then choosing a ML library to do things on top of, and compatibility issues and all this kind of stuff. So that's my technical pick. And non-technical, I'm finishing the last season of Sweet Tooth. And if you haven't watched that series, it's really good to watch with the kids as well, if the kids are old enough. And it's a very nice, light-hearted series to watch. Kind of tries to be light-hearted in a apocalyptic setting, which is an interesting thing.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to throw in a couple of picks of my own. First of all, I just want to point out, if you are interested in Elixir, we have an Elixir podcast. It's called Elixir Mix. I am not on that one, but those guys are awesome, and they cover things very, very well. I've also talked to Jose on multiple occasions from from when he was in the Ruby community, and then when he started doing Elixir stuff. So it's a very, very cool language. And if you're looking for,
I whenever I hear about Elixir, it's usually in the context of how great it is, and to my
Mhm.
shame, I've yet to learn it. Maybe I should start listening to that podcast then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very, very not so hard language to get into, even though it's fully
Yeah.
functional. It's a very, very easy function to programming language to get into.
very approachable. I'm gonna start out with game pick. I always pick a board game or a card game. I'm gonna pick a card game. It's called 6NIM. That's NIMM. Now, when I looked it up on Board Game Geek, it says that it is the same game as Take 5. It has a bunch of other names. Se qui prendi, which looks like it's Italian. Category 5, Take 6, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, Board Game Geek rates it at, or has a weight of 1.19. Says 8 and older can play it, which is probably pretty accurate. Really, just quickly, what it is everybody plays a card face down. So you put out 4 cards. So there are 4 piles. And then you put out your card face down, and then you go from lowest to highest, and you put the card onto whatever pile it would go on, right? So it's whatever number is below it and nearest to it, right? So if there's a 34 out there and you put out a 35, it's going to go on the 34. If you put out a 40, the 40 will go on it as long as there's nothing between 35 and 40 out there. Otherwise, it'll go on the other card, right? And it's always the highest card in the pile that you're playing on. When you play the 6th card on a pile, you get all 5 cards in the pile, and that 6th card that you play becomes the start of the next pile. The different cards are worth different points. And the only other, I guess, rule is if you play a number that is lower than any of the piles out there, then you just take whichever pile you want and replace it with your card. So it's like you played the 6th card, but a lot of times there's a 1 or 2 card pile that only is worth 1 or 2 points. And so you take that pile because you're trying to get the lowest number of points. You play till somebody gets to 66, game's over. There, you know how to play it. It was a lot of fun. The numbers are numbered 1 to 104, I think. And so yeah, you just deal out 10 cards to every player, and you put the rest off to the side. So some of the numbers aren't going to be out there. But anyway, it was a lot of fun. I think we played it in 10, 20 minutes. Yeah, I mean, it's real quick play. But if you're looking for a fast, fun game, 6NIM or Take 5 or whatever it's called where you live, that was super fun game. I'm also going to pile on the AI stuff. So I've started getting into writing AI code. I've been playing with it in both Ruby and JavaScript. I have to say that a lot of the tools for AI are actually nicer in Ruby. That might surprise some people. But anyway, what I'm looking to do, and so keep an eye out for this. I bought the domains AI for Ruby, FOR Ruby, and AI for JavaScript. And so if you're, and I'm gonna put together a newsletter for both of those topics. I'm also going to be putting on a summit, probably the week after Labor Day here in the U.S., which is the first Monday of September. So it'll probably be Friday and Saturday. I'll do the Ruby one first and then the JavaScript right after that. And then 2 weeks after that, so toward the end of September, beginning of October, I'm going to do a 3-month boot camp, and I'm going to be teaching people how to do Java or how to do AI. But the difference between my boot camp and it'll be a 3-month boot camp. So we're going to get into prompt engineering and building chatbots, and right, we're going to be using the APIs, and we might do some model training, but it's going to be fairly lightweight, so you don't have to know the math. You don't have to, have a deep understanding of the models. This is how do you add AI to your app, your web app, basically, but it could be a desktop app or something else if you're writing it in Ruby or JavaScript. So, and if your primary language is a different language, maybe it's Elixir. I'm almost certain they have libraries that attach to the same stuff, and so you can probably figure it out. And I may or may not be able to point you in the right direction, but this is what we're going to do. And so, yeah, AI for JavaScript and AI for Ruby.com. If you go to those websites, you'll be able to sign up for the newsletter for free. You'll be able to sign up for the summit for free. If you want the videos after the summit, that's what you're paying for on those. And then the boot camp will cost money as well. But I want to talk to people, make sure that they're in a position to actually take advantage of the boot camp, because it's not going to be a cheap thing. So anyway, that's what I'm working on these days, and really, I'm really digging it. It's fun stuff. Another pick that I have, this is a Ruby Rogues episode. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But we recently talked to Obi Fernandez, and he has a book about building AI stuff. It's language agnostic. I don't think we've released the Ruby Rogues episode yet. We might have. But oh yeah, it is up here. I'll put the here it is. I'll get the link in here. But anyway, I'm really loving the AI stuff. I think it's amazing. I love, the only thing that I guess JavaScript has that Ruby doesn't is TensorFlow JS, right? There's no TensorFlow Ruby, so you have to interface through JavaScript or Python. But beyond that, yeah, I'm really enjoying just what you can put together with it. And I think a lot of the capabilities that come out of it go well beyond just the prompt for something like ChatGPT. Obi actually explains it very well. What he's done is he's built essentially virtual AI assistants that they take the prompt, but then they also have API capabilities into systems that you use, like your email and stuff. And so you can actually write a prompt where it'll go find an email for you, or respond to certain kinds of emails for you, or things like that. And so you start getting into, okay, I'm not going to just prompt you to write something out or give me an answer. I'm going to prompt you to actually go do something useful. So anyway, I have pontificated on that longer than I needed to, and I am very much enjoying what I've got there. One other pick that I have, and this is a technology pick. It's something that's put out by Basecamp or 37 Signals. It's called Turbo Native, and it's essentially a way of wrapping your web applications into a native app that you can deploy to the app stores on Android and iOS. And I have been very, very happy with what I've been able to do with that without having to write a full-on native app. And I can see the pros and cons, right? I mean, if you're not on the web, it won't work, right? And maybe you can use some local storage or things like that to make it do what you want, maybe load anyway. But the majority of it just requires you to operate, connected to the internet. But most people are operating on their phones connected to the internet anyway. And so, anyway, for what that's worth, I'm really, really enjoying that. Looking at ways to get my web apps onto other systems, though, beyond phones, like the Fire Stick TV and things like that. But Fire Stick TV has a way of wrapping web apps anyway. And so, anyway, that's just another area that I'm diving into, and I might put together a boot camp or a course on that as well. But anyway, so Turbo Native is my last pick.
For AI in Elixir, you have an X and Bumblebee. So if you were trying to get familiar with that subject, training models and running models, NX and Bumblebee got you covered.
Cool. I just tapped a button on my computer now. Oh, there we go. It made the window go away and I couldn't click on it. All right, good deal. Well, thanks for coming. I'm always hesitating to say your name. Vinicius, thank you for coming. This has been really cool, and I love kind of just getting into, hey, these are the steps and kind of levels to performance, and how to read the data, and then how to make your case with the data.
Yeah, my pleasure. Always happy to talk about it.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Until next time, folks. Max out.